So if you're looking to get more into playing lead guitar, or you're already at that point, but you're just looking to improve how you go about creating your solos and leads, then this video will explain and give you some tips on how you can improve this skill. My name is Matt Kelly. Welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I post weekly guitar videos, so make sure to hit that subscribe button down below to see more guitar lessons, gear reviews, and other videos like that. So let's jump into the first tip about lead guitar. The best advice or tip that I was ever given was, in order to be a good lead player, you have to be a good rhythm player, and that really does make a lot of sense. Playing leads is all about timing, knowing when to play, knowing when not to play, being able to keep up with the tempo, and playing in time with the chord progression. It'll be very hard for you to come up with great sounding leads if your rhythm is off. Having a good lead melody and some great licks within your solo is really only half of it. Now you have to play it in time in order for it to sound as best as it can, or else it might sound a bit jumbled and all over the place. So if you find that your leads are sounding just okay, and you're having a hard time keeping up and creating a solo that flows, it may be because your rhythm just needs to be worked on a little bit, and that's okay. Here's an example. Let's say I have this lick and I don't think it sounds as good as it could over a backing track or whatever. What I would then do is break down this lick with a metronome to get the timing right. So I'm going to purposely play this lick out of time and just make it sound off. And then I'm going to show you how to practice it over a metronome, and then how it's going to sound when it's in time. So what I would do now is pull out my metronome and find a comfortable and slower BPM. I'll just bring it down to 70. And I'm going to take that lick slow. So once I get comfortable with 70 BPM, I'll then bump it up maybe by 5 or maybe even 10, and eventually you'll get this result. If you're still not sure about how to use a metronome, then I'm going to link a video that I watched a couple of years back that kind of helped me have a better understanding of that. So I'll link that down in the description so you'll have a better understanding of how to use one. So let's now get into lead guitar tip number 2. Learning different techniques. And I'm not necessarily talking about slides and bends. I'm more so talking about things like grace notes, motifs, and economy picking. Now, learning how to properly bend and use slides is important too, but these techniques can help spice up your solo and maybe even help you play faster. The first one I mentioned, grace notes. Grace notes for me really changed the way my solos sound. It can make it sound much more jazzier and much more dynamic. To make things simple, a grace note is when you slide into a correct note from a wrong note. For example, if I'm playing in B Dorian and I wanted to use this approach, this is what I would play. Now, it's important to note that I wouldn't stay on those wrong notes very long. It has to be quick, or else it'll sort of sound like you're purposely hitting a wrong note. As long as you know your scale positions and you're comfortable with the notes on the fretboard, then you should have no issues with this approach. So here are some licks that can help you practice this new technique. The tabs will be available for free, and they will be linked down in the description. The next approach I mentioned was motifs. A motif is when you play a lick and then you repeat that same lick in a different octave. This is a really cool approach, especially if you have a great lick, but you don't want to keep repeating it. So this time you play it in a different octave, which will give it a different sound. You can do this all across the neck. And if you know your scale positions and the notes within those scales, then this should be relatively easy. If you do not, then make sure to stick around to the end of the video because I'm going to be covering this on my last and final lead guitar tip. So for the last technique I said, it's more so of a picking technique. Almost all guitar players use the alternate picking method, and rightfully so because it's a great approach. But sometimes this can actually limit what you can play. Learning economy picking can add a different sound and approach to your soloing, and can even help you play faster across all of the strings. So for alternate picking, you can see that after every stroke, it's either up or down. So down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and so on. For economy picking, we have down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down. So every next string is going to be a downstroke. Economy picking is a blend of both alternate and sweep picking. Your pick just glides down to the next string since you are ending on a down and continuing with a down, instead of ending on a down and continuing with an up. Do you see why economy picking would be much more efficient? When you practice and get the hang of it, it'll feel so much smoother and different in the best way possible. For the last and final tip that can help you with your lead guitar playing is learning how to solo all across the fretboard. This is the one thing I see a lot of guitarists wanting to be able to do efficiently, but I see a lot of guitar players struggling to get to that point. Knowing all of your scale positions like the pentatonic shapes and all the positions of the major scale is super important. You really have to know them, which means you're super comfortable with them and you have them memorized. I think some players can play these positions, but putting them together is the hard part. Now, to get out of this little obstacle, I would learn arpeggios from these scales, learn guitar solos from your favorite artists, and maybe even learn about triads. Arpeggios can help you combine two or more scales together, and that will show you how they are intertwined with each other. Here's an arpeggio lick that you can use that combines the first two positions of the minor scale. You can find the tab to this arpeggio in the description, but if you want to learn how to come up with your own, then try this. So pick any note starting on the low E string from a certain scale shape. In this example, I'm going to be using the first position of the A minor scale. That one. So I'm going to start on the third note from this scale, which would be C, with my pinky. And then you're going to pick another note on the next string down, so the A string. So I'm going to pick the E note from this A minor scale on the 7th fret of the A string. So you want to keep doing this until you reach the high E string. So I'm just going to make an example up real quick. So we have this. Now you're not limited to just playing one note per string, although most arpeggios are like that. But for example, right there is when I used two notes. Now I just did this to add some extra flair to the arpeggio, but you do not have to do that if you don't want to. You just have the option if you'd like. Now besides learning arpeggios, learning guitar solos that use these scales can really give you great insight into how those other guitarists are using these scales. A solo that I learned and connected the dots for me was Down by the River by Neil Young. When I was learning it, I noticed that he was using the open E minor pentatonic position, and it just helped me understand it a little bit better by seeing it in a soloing context. And for the last thing I mentioned, triads. Learning the shapes of them can actually help you move across the fretboard. Now I'm not going to completely go over triads in this video or else it'll be 15 minutes longer, but I did do a full video on this a couple months back and I'll link that down in the description and also right here. But when you learn these triad shapes all across the neck, you can also use them as arpeggios. So for example, here are the three major triad shapes in the key of G major on the first three strings. Now I could arpeggiate these triads and blend them in with the scale shapes that I already know, like this. Now, playing lead guitar is something that all guitar players want to be able to do well. And when you're first starting out, it may even seem impossible to get to that point. And even for those who can solo well, we tend to get into ruts and get tired of our own playing. But if you follow some of these tips and practice consistently, then you should have no problem reaching your goals or coming up with newer sounding leads that will spice up your playing. If you want to learn more about lead guitar, then make sure to join my private Facebook guitar group where you can interact and chat with other guitarists, get free private lessons, backing tracks, and a whole lot more. The link to request access will be down in the description below. If you thought this video was helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to download your free PDF that will go over everything in detail that I went over in this video. I'll see you in next week's video and don't forget to keep on playing.